The early morning silence over the Negev desert was shattered by the unmistakable roar of jet engines. At precisely 4:17 local time, radar operators at Israel's Southern Command detected multiple inbound aircraft signatures, fast, low, and coordinated. Within minutes, for Israeli base camps, strategically positioned near Beersheva, Dimona, Ramon, and Eilat, were under direct assault. Egyptian F-16s and Iranian Su-35s, flying in synchronized formation, launched precision-guided munitions that struck command centers, fuel depots, and satellite relay stations. The strikes were not random. They were surgical, aimed at disabling Israel's early warning systems and disrupting its southern defense grid. Inside the Beersheva base, soldiers scrambled for cover as the first wave of missiles tore through the communications wing. The blast radius engulfed the adjacent barracks, sending shockwaves across the compound. At Dimona, home to sensitive nuclear infrastructure, the attack was even more calculated. Iranian drones hovered silently before releasing bunker-busting payloads that penetrated reinforced concrete shelters. The Ramon airbase, known for housing elite fighter squadrons, saw its runway cratered and hangars engulfed in flames. Meanwhile, Eilat's naval coordination post was hit with electromagnetic pulse weapons, knocking out surveillance systems and leaving the Red Sea corridor exposed. This wasn't just a military strike. It was a message, a coordinated show of force by two regional powers, challenging Israel's long-standing air superiority. The timing, just days after Israel's own preemptive operations in Iran, suggests retaliation with strategic intent. Civilian air traffic was immediately grounded, and emergency protocols activated nationwide. The Israeli Defense Forces scrambled interceptors, but the damage had already been done. For bases, each vital to Israel's defense architecture, were left smoldering. The question now wasn't just how, but why, and what comes next. Within hours of the strikes, satellite imagery confirmed the extent of the destruction. Smoke plumes rose from scorched earth, and emergency crews worked frantically to contain fires and rescue trapped personnel. The Israeli government convened an emergency cabinet meeting, with Prime Minister Netanyahu declaring the attacks an act of war and vowing swift retaliation. But behind the scenes, intelligence analysts were already piecing together the puzzle. The coordination between Egypt and Iran, two nations with historically divergent agendas, raised eyebrows. This wasn't a spontaneous alliance. It was a calculated convergence of interests. Egypt, long wary of Israel's growing influence in the Sinai and Red Sea corridors, had recently faced diplomatic setbacks over maritime control. Iran, meanwhile, had been reeling from cyberattacks allegedly launched by Mossad operatives. The joint strike was a geopolitical statement, a warning that regional powers could and would act in concert when provoked. Military experts noted the precision of the operation. The aircraft flew below radar thresholds, used terrain masking, and deployed decoys to confuse Israeli defenses. It was a textbook example of modern asymmetric warfare. On the ground, the mood shifted from shock to defiance. Civilians in nearby towns began stockpiling supplies, and reservists flooded enlistment centers. Social media lit up with footage of the bombings, some captured by dashcams and surveillance drones. The images were harrowing. Flames licking the sky, sirens wailing, soldiers dragging wounded comrades to safety. Yet amid the chaos, a sense of unity emerged. Israel had been hit hard, but its resolve was hardening. The narrative was shifting from victimhood to vengeance. And as the sun set over the battered bases, one thing became clear. This was only the beginning of a much larger confrontation. As night fell, the international response began to take shape. The United Nations Security Council called for an emergency session, while Washington, Moscow, and Beijing issued cautious statements urging restraint. But behind closed doors, diplomatic channels buzzed with urgency. The United States, a longtime ally of Israel, activated its regional assets, rerouting naval vessels toward the eastern Mediterranean. Russia, maintaining ties with both Iran and Egypt, remained conspicuously silent. Meanwhile, European capitals scrambled to assess the fallout, fearing a wider escalation that could destabilize energy routes and trigger refugee flows. Inside Tel Aviv's defense headquarters, the mood was tense but focused. Military strategists pored over satellite data, intercepted communications, and drone footage. The strikes had exposed vulnerabilities, gaps in radar coverage, delays in response time, and over-reliance on automated defense systems. But they also revealed something else. The attackers had intimate knowledge of Israeli base layouts. That level of precision suggested insider intelligence or cyber infiltration. Mossad operatives were dispatched to trace digital footprints, while Shin Bet began interrogating personnel with access to sensitive infrastructure. Public sentiment, meanwhile, was shifting rapidly. News anchors spoke in clipped tones, analysts debated retaliation scenarios, and families lit candles for the fallen. The hashtag Israel under attack trended globally, drawing both sympathy and condemnation. In Cairo and Tehran, state media celebrated the operation as a triumph of sovereignty. But in Israel, the narrative was clear. This was a breach of national dignity, and it would not go unanswered. Fighter jets roared overhead, and armored convoys rolled south. The country was mobilizing not just for defense but for reprisal. And as the first retaliatory plans were drafted, one chilling realization settled in. The region had crossed a threshold. The rules of engagement had changed. By dawn, Israel's countermeasures were already underway. Operation Iron Vow, a rapid response campaign, was greenlit by the War Cabinet. Within minutes, Israeli F-35s took to the skies, targeting radar installations and airfields in western Egypt and central Iran. The strikes were swift, calculated, and aimed at crippling launch capabilities. In Ismailia, Egypt's primary air command center was hit with bunker-busting ordnance, while in Shiraz, Iran's drone control hub was reduced to rubble. The message was unmistakable. Israel would not wait for diplomacy. It would retaliate with precision and force. But retaliation came with consequences. Egypt activated its S-300 defense systems, intercepting several incoming missiles over the Sinai. Iran, meanwhile, launched a barrage of ballistic missiles toward northern Israel, triggering the Iron Dome and David's Sling systems. The skies lit up with intercept trails, and the region braced for escalation. Civilian shelters were opened in Haifa, Ashdod, and Jerusalem. Schools were closed, and hospitals shifted to emergency protocols. The specter of full-scale war loomed larger than it had in over a decade. In the midst of this, regional actors began choosing sides. Saudi Arabia condemned the attacks but urged restraint. Turkey called for mediation, while Qatar offered to host emergency peace talks. Yet, on the ground, diplomacy felt distant. The air was thick with tension, and every siren was a reminder of how quickly peace can fracture. Israeli citizens, though shaken, displayed remarkable resilience. Volunteers distributed supplies, medics worked around the clock, and communities rallied to support displaced families. The nation was under siege, but its spirit remained unbroken. And as the retaliatory strikes continued, one truth became undeniable. The Middle East was entering a new phase, one defined not by proxy conflicts, but by direct confrontation between sovereign powers. As the dust settled over the bombed base camps, the psychological impact began to ripple across the region. This wasn't just a military confrontation, it was a tectonic shift in Middle Eastern dynamics. For decades, Israel had operated with a sense of aerial invincibility, its defense systems hailed as among the most advanced in the world. But the coordinated assault by Egypt and Iran shattered that perception. It proved that even fortified strongholds could be breached, and that alliances, no matter how unlikely, could reshape the battlefield overnight. In Jerusalem, political factions momentarily set aside differences. Parliament members from across the spectrum stood united in support of the armed forces. The national anthem echoed through the Knesset chambers, broadcast live to a population hungry for reassurance. Meanwhile, in Tehran and Cairo, celebrations continued. Crowds gathered in public squares, waving flags and chanting slogans. State media framed the operation as a victory for regional autonomy, a pushback against what they described as Israeli aggression and Western interference. But beneath the surface, the stakes were rising. Intelligence reports hinted at further mobilizations. Submarines repositioned in the Red Sea. Cyber units activated across multiple borders. The region was bracing for a prolonged standoff, one that could spill beyond conventional warfare into economic disruption and proxy escalations. Humanitarian agencies issued alerts, anticipating displacement and resource strain. And yet, amid the uncertainty, one sentiment prevailed: resolve. Israel, wounded but unyielding, was recalibrating. Its response would not be impulsive, it would be strategic, layered, and relentless. The bombings marked a turning point, not just in military terms, but in the psychological calculus of deterrence. The message to its adversaries was clear: you may strike, but you will not break us. And as the world watched, the countdown to the next chapter had already begun.